Hey, welcome to Live from America podcast. This is Hatem alongside me, comedian and podcaster and producer, and does a lot of funny videos. Boris Hyken is here. Hey, Boris,
What's up?
what's
Hey, how's
happening?
it going?
Good to have you. And our guest is a board-certified forensic psychiatrist, best-selling author for her book, The Terrorist Therapist on Amazon, and three-time Emmy-honored TV personality and known as America's Psychiatrist. She has an extensive experience in analyzing criminal minds, political extremists, and media-driven mass hysteria. And she is here, Dr. Carole Lieberman. Hello, Dr. Lieberman. How are you?
Hi there. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Criminal minds and extremist terrorists. I mean, you live in the right moment right now. This is perfect for you.
Yes, that's true. Well, actually, I became the terrorist therapist after 9/11 uh,
Hmm.
because, as I was talking to you before we started, I'm a born and bred New Yorker. And even though by then I was living in California, 9/11, my heart was and is still in New York. And so I was very much affected by the 9/11 strikes. And since then, I've been helping people cope with terrorism. I've been helping people become more resilient for the next terror attacks. That since 9/11, so all these 24 years, um, uh, I've been working on this. Now I'm doing volunteer work helping Israelis by Zoom, helping them either in Israel or in wherever they are. They some in Europe, some in America, and I've written two books about terrorism and so on. So I've been working on terrorism. I host a podcast, the Terrorist Therapist Podcast, um, and so I've been working on terrorism since 9/11, basically. So yeah.
That was yeah, that was my it was gonna be my first question is how did you get into it? Um, when there's moments when we live in a world like we are right now with a lot of uncertainty and wars and violence and all that. Like, what's your first advice for people that living through here? I mean, like, for example, Trump, even, if you support it, you don't support, he is a character, he brings like all the presidents before that we used to know. It's like we don't know the news, but he's in the news like every 5 seconds. And
Right.
it just like it makes like even this podcast, I used to book this podcast like months ahead, but now I can't because I don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow. You know, so, and the effect of that, even if it's because it could be a good thing, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, he's working a lot, so it could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. But how do you cope with people? What's the advice to people that like just sick of the news and the fear and uncertainty and all that?
Well, yes. And I know that same thing. You don't know what's going to happen, even just in the war since it started, right?
Yeah.
This we every day it's been something different, so you couldn't even plan really. I started writing an op-ed at the beginning, and the next day it was different. The next day it was different, and then today, then there's supposedly this ceasefire. Um, but what can people do? Well, first of all, one thing I can say is that people shouldn't be obsessed with watching the news because, they did a study after 9/11 that showed that people who were not even living anywhere near the sites of 9/11, not near New York, not near the Pentagon, not near Pennsylvania, um, if they were watching a lot of times in the news or then there were movies, the buildings falling down, the number one site memory that refreshes your memory about 9/11, the site of the Twin Towers falling. If they kept watching that, they would get PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, even if you were nowhere near it. So the same thing. I mean, of course, we're not near the Middle East, but it's the same phenomenon. If you keep watching the bombs and there's 24/7 news, and then of course the internet, so you could watch it every waking minute. And that would be very bad because it really just traumatizes you. You may not think or realize that it's affecting you, but it really is. And
How does that Sorry, how does that juxtapose with the idea of being desensitized to violence from watching those types of things? Because they always say too much like violent television, violent movies. What's the difference between the two? What causes somebody, or are they related as being desensitized, not necessarily mutually exclusive from being traumatized?
Well, that's a very good question because, before 9/11, my major cause was violent media. Did you know that? Did you
I
know?
did not.
Was that a trick question? Um, yes, I did a lot of, I was the head of the National Coalition on TV Violence, and I did a lot of talking and protesting and all of that, protesting outside violent movies, with Schwarzenegger, for example. And then of course video games came, and those are the worst. And yes, on the one hand, you become desensitized. The more hours of violence that you watch, um, the more you become desensitized to it, and that is happening here too with war in general. But it also makes you more aggressive. Now, it's different really watching like a real life war, real life violence like 9/11 or the Israel-Iran war, in the sense that like in video games, you're seeing the people shoot and kill people. Here, you don't really see that. You see the bombs, but you don't really see the people being killed, and certainly you're not in charge of doing it like on a video game. But there's both effects. Now, the effect of PTSD, that is because you're feeling traumatized because you're remembering, like with 9/11, you were remembering what that was all about. And it's not so much, I mean, it's not really violent like seeing people shoot each other on 9/11, the towers falling, but it is exposure to violence, certainly. So there are all different kinds of aspects of it. But like during COVID, during the lockdowns, when people were locked down for 2 years, a lot of people spent that time playing violent video games. And that is why people have come out of the lockdowns really a lot angrier. That's one of the reasons. I mean, we're also angry because we were in the lockdown, but also playing all these images for so many hours a day for 2 years really built up a lot of anger. So we have airplane rage, we have, car rage, um, road rage. In other words, it doesn't have to be like serial killers, although that too. But that's because it's a different kind of violence. You're really involved in killing
Uh,
yourself.
two things quickly. One, to your point with 9/11, I remember maybe it took 10 years or so, and they start saying we're not going to show the image of the plane hitting the tower anymore in TV. I don't know if you remember that, but
I
it was,
do.
yeah, it took a while, but it was, um, it was significantly changed, the image is, you know, and the other thing is like media, when you say you can stop watching the news, stop watching the news is not, like it used to be, like you turn on a news channel, it becomes the news. The news is everything now. Social media, post,
Right.
friends call you, you're walking down the street, protest, even some bars have certain thing, so it's surrounding you by all that. Um, but so yeah, it's really hard to escape all this. And how do you like? Also, there is this activism, want to be involved, make it a better world, all this. So you need to be informed in one way. So how can you balance this, being informed and take a stand and know what you're talking about, instead of like blindly supporting a side, or also keep your mind in a right shape.
Well, first of all, about the airplanes hitting the Twin Towers, I know very well that there's a thing. I mean, I was surprised when I found out, but I learned that there was this taboo against showing it when I have been doing for the past 4 years. I made music videos about 9/11 that I put on mobile billboards, trucks, the sides of trucks in New York and in Washington, D.C. And it was all about like why we should remember 9/11, the people who died. If you don't, he who forgets history is doomed to repeat it, all kinds of things like that. This past 9/11 anniversary, I updated it because really now we are having terrorists in our streets. These protesters, for example, who are pro-Hamas and all that. And so I made the video more of a warning that and I still but from the beginning when I put gave the video to a company, the company that was supposed to have the trucks going around, the woman who was in charge of this looked at the video and she said, "No, we're not going to put this on our trucks. You have to get rid of those planes flying into the building." Really, lady? That's kind of the whole point, or not the whole point, but I mean, you can't talk about 9/11 without having that. So, I took off a second or two of that, and I found another company who would show the video with the planes. But yes, I was pretty shocked about that. But anyhow, so so wait, what was your? So yes, to
Can I,
answer
can
your
I
question,
actually,
go
sorry,
ahead.
go.
Yeah, I have a point too, but yeah, go ahead and the boys can go and then I'll go. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Boris, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so to bounce off of what you were just saying, I was actually going to ask this earlier, but now it seems even more appropriate. When you talk about the protests, obviously, I think it's crazy to support Hamas, Hezbollah, all that, but there's also this mass, obviously, of young people that
Yeah.
are themselves similarly, whether you call it PTSD or whatever, but they're seeing footage of, dead kids in Gaza and buildings entire square miles falling to rubble. A it sounds based on what you're describing that some of them are probably experiencing various psychological effects from this sort of thing. And B, how do you see their psychology in terms of, obviously some of them are anti-West, just straight up anti-Western, anti-capitalist.
Yeah.
And then some of them are, I know some people that are out there that I'm like, this isn't a person that I consider to be like hateful or hateful of America. This is a person who's watching footage and reading numbers that may or may not be reliable, that feels like, compelled to join this thing in the streets.
Well, there is a mixture of people in these protests. Um, but I'm not sure that I mean, most of these students at colleges weren't born when 9/11 happened. So, yes, there have been movies and news, reports and so on, but not as much as if you were alive then and you kept seeing these news reports of the planes going into the buildings. Um, I mean, I think those people, it's a very unfortunate combination of colleges getting money from um, Middle Eastern countries that want to destroy America. I mean, from Iran, notably, for example. I don't know. I'm looking at your names and I don't know where you come from. I'm like afraid to say
You can
anything.
say whatever you want. I mean,
Yeah, you
we
should
can
speak.
yeah, we can disagree. You can say whatever you want, but
Where do you come from?
So Hatem and I are from very opposite places.
yeah, we're not even
I'm
close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I come as a refugee from Ukraine
Oh, yeah.
originally.
I'm,
Um,
I'm I was born Egyptian in Kuwait, but my parents are Egyptian.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting that
Yeah,
you.
but obviously we raised here and we can disagree obviously in a lot of things, but when you say like Middle Eastern countries supporting colleges and stuff like that, I'm not sure if that's uh correct. Like, do you
oh,
have?
Qatar's sent tons of money to
No, you
the
said Iran. I don't think Iran can or have the money to. I don't think even our government will let Iran support colleges. But to that point, also, I feel like obviously we can, like I said, we can disagree politically, and that's the whole point of being here. But I don't think all the protest when you say like the supporting Hamas is a terrorist organization. So if somebody's carrying the flag or doing something, they will be arrested as we've seen. But the major protests that a
Well, no,
lot of
hold on.
people let me
Just,
just finish my
I mean,
point.
sorry, I was just going to say that I think personally Hamas is a terrorist organization, but in America, you're free to fly whatever flag you want. You're free to say
Sure.
whatever crazy shit you want to say.
But yeah, I see what you're trying to say. But my point is like I think we're trying to a lot of times may say that the whole protest is one thing, while it could be a reaction to footage they've seen, what's going on in Gaza, stuff like that. Just like if people protested what's going on in Sudan or Congo or all this is a human reaction or Ukraine, stuff like that. So I don't think it's just one side that we should say like, oh, look, there are all, this. But let's shift a little bit.
Yeah, but I had said that at the beginning. It's a variety of people. It's people, who I mean there are that there are some of the people are being paid to be there, right?
I'm
Um,
sure. I'm sure every like there's not one cause that doesn't have a support of people that pay and have influence and other agendas and stuff like that.
right.
100%. Every single thing, even in election, that's fair. But I'm saying like I feel like a lot of people are reacting to being human and just having something. Same thing when people if and this is my thing with it and then we can move on is if you reacted when October 7th happened different than when you reacted when what Gaza happened, you're not a fair human because what happened was in both sides in October 7th was horrible terrorist attack and all these hostages taken, and I interviewed one of the mothers of the hostages and she was just it will break your heart. She was amazing and just so like if we manage to see it from a human side, and then you see what happened after that and all these people like children and women and men dying in Gaza. It's horrible. So how
Well,
do we
but it's not the same. The first of all,
No, you can't compare pains. I didn't say it's the same. I said if you didn't react the same. If you not react as a human being to what happened in October 7th and all the murder and the stuff that happened, and then you react to the innocent people. We're not talking about people that were involved. We're talking about specifically innocent people.
but wait a second. First of all, yes, they were innocent people in Israel on October 7th, and
Correct.
Hamas, which is a terrorist organization supported by Iran,
Mm-hmm.
uh, came and
Sure.
attacked Israel, and they wore these glasses that videotaped it. So they themselves took pictures of the rapes and the
And that's what we
mutilation
said. It's horrible.
and put cooking babies in the oven and all that. Now, in the meantime, since then, Hamas has given the media the wrong information about, what Israel is doing in Hamas. Israel, I mean, in Gaza, Israel tries to warn people, has warned people, putting leaflets down and everything else, telling people to get out of the area where they plan on attacking. And they're trying to attack Hamas to get rid of Hamas. So, and Hamas in the meantime takes the Palestinians or the people in Gaza and they hold them in front of them so that they can then say, oh, look, Israel shot this person. Yeah, they were using it as a human shield.
I think
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think even Hatem and I disagree on some of this stuff, but I think to tie it back to your expertise though, because I think this is where your experience is probably really interesting in this. My question was more in the psychology of because there's at the very least there's like a really simple difference. There's people who protested the day after October 7th against Israel. People who, ideologically this wasn't about any response. These are people that have probably been educated through this Qatari money and people who have been, basically are anti-Western no matter what the take is at this point, which is on both sides of the political aisle at this point, basically, in some ways. But then, to the average person who's not politically attuned, who doesn't have a deep history of that region, of how the Palestinian movement might have formed, of how in general those lines were drawn over the past 75, 80 years, to somebody who's not actually glued to the news, but nonetheless has been inundated with footage without the context that you're describing, Carol. So to them, you can tell somebody as much as you want that, Hamas uses as a tactic, as a force multiplier, the idea of having their own people die. But that's really difficult, especially unless you have like a decent amount of education on what's going on in that part of the world in general, the forces that are at play, all these different things. For most people,
You're frozen.
Mhm.
So yeah, until he until he comes back. Boris, if you hear us, here we go.
Okay.
I can hear you. Oh, okay, good. Sorry. I just wanted to focus on your expertise in terms of psychology and viewing that kind of footage for somebody who's not that politically attuned, not that knowledgeable about this. But to the average person, I know a lot of people who are not that political that like I'm not going to spend time discussing the history of the Middle East with them for hours because there's a lot of context that goes into this sort of thing. But what's in terms of psychology, is there something else? Is there a different result from the average person that we could get? Like, what could we assume from somebody who's watching this kind of footage on their TV for 2 years? And it's hard to beyond what they're
How,
just seeing.
I mean, how does it impact them if they've been watching
And
this?
is it a normal process? Is it normal or is it abnormal for someone to come to the conclusion that there's a city in rubble and there's lots of dead kids. I don't like this. And, beyond that, it takes more explanation, whereas it's just a very
Uh,
visceral first thought thing, to me at least, for as a not an expert, as a natural psychological response to seeing all of that.
well, there are different responses. Like, for example, um, the video that was taken by Hamas of all the things, the horrible things that they did to Israelis. There are people who watch that. Some people watch it and they think, oh, this is horrible. But some people watch it, too many people watch it and think, oh, this isn't true. The Israelis just created this with AI or, just different effects on video and so on. They don't want to believe that it was Hamas who was doing all these things.
But
Who
those
So,
are
who said that?
No,
I
there people definitely, Hatem, people, I agree with you. There's sick people. But my question is more about health, like, or at least previously healthy people. To Hatem, there's definitely people who either sell, I mean,
Okay,
DSA,
so
one of the
when we
local
say
DSA
a lot of
chapters.
people, when you say a lot of people saying that, I know. Listen, my partner in this podcast also, beside Boris is Noam, and he's Israeli Jewish, very pro-Israel, and me and him go a lot, and we went and see, the movie that the Israeli embassy put together, and so everything, so I have not met one person, at least in my circle, that say this is not real, that
uh,
these videos are
there are
fake,
there
but
are some people who do that, but
there
pe-
are people, I'm sure there are people, but not a lot of people. That's my point. It's like I think is everything that we talked about. Even when you say like at this point, if we want to ignore the fact that there are so many civilians died, you know, there's nothing really we can say, because the facts is there. But we can, like I said, I interviewed the mother of one of the hostages, and she saw the whole picture, you know and it's a tragedy story, and to everybody that's still there and to everybody that died. And to me, like my standard is the same, which is, I say if you don't react as a human being to one and you take sides and you try to do one thing, that's different. But I do want to shift it away from this because I'm really interested in the difference between the criminal mind and the terrorist mind, because this is very are they similar? Like they're both evil, obviously, but how evil is evil? How evil you become a criminal
which
mind
one is
versus
more evil?
yeah. But like, what makes you like, you know, almost like a criminal, even like the serial killers, stuff like that, versus
Okay.
the extreme. And the other question, which is it would be great for you as well,
Why do
because
you give me two questions at a time?
no, because it's connected. Because it's you and the media personality. When you see all these documentary about the serial killers and stuff like that, does that affect? Is that something you like as a therapist? Is that something that can help, or this help the people that? watch it.
Does is it good for the people who watch it or not? Is I would
Yes, to
okay.
understand that this level of evilness happens.
Uh-huh. Well, it can be both. Like it depends on how they portray it. If they portray it as sympathetic to the killer, the criminal, um, then that can get people to think about doing that for themselves, to becoming, these poor criminals and look what they got though. It was so exciting when they got money. I mean, it was the Netflix movie about the Menendez brothers that started this whole thing that got them to be able to be possibly paroled.
Yeah.
So, and there's like a movie about Ted Bundy that, it also depends how much gore they show and all that. Depends how it is framed. But the difference between the mind of a criminal and a terrorist, yes, they like a killer criminal, they're both evil, but the criminal becomes that way because most of them are born with a tendency towards a psychopathic personality. But you don't have to be born with that. You can be nurtured into that. So if you have parents who are cruel, who are very abusive, um, physically abusive, sexually abusive, emotionally abusive, all these kinds of things, that can make a little child uh, go towards becoming that way himself. And typically they show these things during childhood, bedwetting and cruelty to animals and fire setting. That's called a triad. And if as the child is growing up, if he begins to show each of these things, we see that a lot with with killers or with even school shooters, where if you look into their background, they harmed little animals, like the killer in Florida, school shooter in Florida. He used to torture pets, and he did set fires, and his mother called the police sometimes, but he never got enough psychiatric treatment. But the signs were there. I don't know if he was bedwetting. We didn't find that out in the news, but it's certainly possible. And whereas with a terrorist is following the lessons he's been taught since he was a little baby. It's both nurtured, but in different ways. When they go to madrasas and they're taught to hate Israel and to hate Jews, and that the best thing they could do in their world to honor Allah is to,
You're talking specifically about Muslim terrorists, correct?
yes, radical Islamist terrorists, right?
Yeah, those are the only ones that are out there.
So when they play these games, in school in the madrasas, and they are given guns or play guns to shoot each other, and they're told that this is you're going into Israel now. I mean, they're told how to create the scenario of October 7th, and this is play for them when they're 4 years old, and then they read the Quran, and they pick out the parts of the Quran that are about killing and
There's no parts in Quran about killing. I read the Quran. I doubt that you read it. And if you can give me one sentence that the Quran says about killing, we can talk about it. It's funny that I'm trying to get away from it. And this is the one thing is like, we're trying to have a conversation directed in one way, but it seems that it's always going back to certain things that only this of the world that have terrorism. There's a lot of terrorism coming there, but there is no. We talk about shooting, you're talking about a lot of things, but it's always coming back to like kids being taught certain things. But let me ask you this. Do you think if a kid right now that in Gaza that lost his parents and brothers and mother and everybody, what they gonna become if they're not nurtured the right way?
Well, it's very sad. They're living in a place, in a place where there's war. It's sad for Israeli children too.
No, I'm not trying. Every time you're trying to compare pains, I'm not. I'm saying I'm a human, and I think both are suffering a lot, and the people in charge are not doing the right thing.
Well,
But what I'm trying to say is, like, as a psychiatrist, there is no effect at all. It surprised me. There's no effect at all. If somebody saw his entire, family getting murdered, like, it's strange to me,
why do you say there's no effect? What do you mean?
when I ask you, I'm when Boris asked a question about, like, okay, what about the if somebody grew up and they lost everybody, all their, they say their parents, they saw their kids, and to make it more relatable to what you like, somebody that grew up in October 7th and saw all this happen to their parents, aren't they gonna be hating of the other side and never want it? I mean, that, like, the guy that shot Rabin, for example.
Let me ask me a more broad, yeah. So a more broad question would just be, you know, it doesn't seem like terrorism can be defined solely as something that applies to Islamic terrorism, right? Because obviously there's not only even terrorism within Zionism, Haganah, and early groups that employed violence against civilians to drive the British out and as part of that political movement. But there's obviously also terrorism in the U.S. that's homebred. You have your Timothy McVeigh Oklahoma City bomber. So shouldn't there be a definition here and something that applies more broadly because it does sound like based on, what Hatem is saying is that your definition kind of circles back to this very particular group, which is obviously prevalent and
Oh,
obviously a
that's
problem.
okay, but that's not what that's not what I'm saying. I mean, I have focused for the past 23 years on is radical Islamist terrorism.
Sure.
Okay.
I see. So
Um,
that's your
I'm not
expertise.
saying that there aren't any other terrorists in the whole world. Terrorists in general, terrorism in general, is when you create um, acts, violent acts, in order to make changes sociologically and politically. So that's why we could say, like, with homegrown terrorists, domestic terrorists, and all that, doing things like Timothy McVeigh and all that to create changes. But and sure, like if a child in Gaza loses their parent or a child in Israel loses their parent, they both grieve. I'm not saying that is different, but I will point out because yes, I was mentioning the my website where I have these videos, and I did one for October 7th also, and included in there I have a video of this of kids or of people in Gaza celebrating, kids and adults celebrating after October 7th. So, you know, um,
I mean, how many, again, we go to a point that I think it's not really valid because there is a lot of people that's bad people. There's so many videos of people celebrating in Gaza and Arabs celebrating, and there's so many videos of Israelis celebrating. I mean, we also TikTok. There's so much, but
I'm
that
gonna
doesn't make us. Let me just make that point. That doesn't make us fall into that trap. We should be a higher standard. We should be humans to a level that when October 7th we say no, that's wrong, and we need that
yes.
they get the leaders of Hamas. And when Gaza happens, we say no, that's wrong. That's a lot of innocent people dying. Instead, we should have went to the leadership in Qatar that have a lot of money that supporting all the leaders there and bombed them, but we couldn't do that. So what I'm saying is, like, oh, we're trying to point, like, there's certain
getting
people, like,
close.
celebrating here or there. It happens all the time, but it doesn't define a 1.7 billion people that one thing.
Well,
I think
Hatem,
I choose to believe the good and human side all the time. And I have so many friends that Israeli, and I have so many friends that are Palestinians. I'm not Israeli, I'm not Palestinian. I don't have a dog this far, but you know, I'm human and I can react to something. And somebody did something bad. When I see the videos that Hamas did on October 7th, it's like there's no way these are human beings. And when you see the same thing in Gaza, if you react to one side and not the other, and I'm not talking about the war. War is war. Shit happen in war. I'm saying the extra stuff that happens. But again, I would love to move on from the political side because I'm really interested in the criminal mind part.
Yeah.
When you see what's the name of that documentary in Netflix, that the guy that was I forgot his name, that was eating his victims, and some of the
Yes.
vic yeah, and some
That
of
was
the
Ted, not Ted Bundy. That was
but
God,
You know what I'm
Uh,
talking about, right?
I know what you're talking about. I watched it. Yes, it was
Yeah,
a
I actually couldn't finish it. But there was a lot of the families of the victims still alive, and they're like,
Jeffrey
don't.
Dahmer.
Oh, Obama, yeah.
very good, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the families were said like, don't do this. Like, some of the families of the victims are still alive, and they're like,
Uh-huh.
we don't want to see that. Did you? What's your thoughts on that? Like, when you see, like, I saw the there's a lot of, like, I feel like, either shows like Dexter, like it's almost how you have this thing of people liking the serial killer a little bit from these shows.
Right.
So is that
Especially
the reason
women.
that they do the documentary, to be like, oh no, this is horrible, in your opinion?
I think that it depends on the filmmaker. You
Mm,
know, I think some of them want to show that this is horrible. I think Jeffrey Dahmer, um, you know, there was a little bit of sympathy that you felt when I watched it anyway. Not that I'm okay with people killing and eating people,
yeah,
but the way they showed his child, as a
I
psychiatrist,
agree with you. Yeah.
person's childhood, and they showed his childhood as being really horrible, that like his father didn't pay any attention to him. And I mean that's why that I remember at the end that my conclusion was that he was killing and eating and keeping these people with him, eating them so that they would stay with him because his father kept leaving him. So they wanted, he'd keep them in his bed at night and all that for a
You
while.
know, that's
And
very interesting because I thought exactly the same thing. You're right. And if I was a director, I would do exactly what you're just saying. That's a great point, actually. I thought exactly like, why is he eating them? And it's
yeah,
like, I
yeah.
I get to the same conclusion. Yep.
So it's kind of sad that these people had such horrible childhoods. It doesn't make it right what they're doing, but it's sad.
Yeah, no, it's
Can I Can I ask
yeah.
this? When you were describing before, like terrorist versus criminal, is there any relation? Is this pop culture psychology, or is this a real thing that I remember seeing? It might have just been in like someone's Instagram video or something. But the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath, and based on what you were saying, it sounded familiar, like where I forget which is which, but one is learned through trauma, essentially, whereas the other one is born with some of these issues you're describing. Is that a real dichotomy or is that like a pop culture version of it?
Well, it's like there's been some there isn't 100% agreement even among psychiatrists about all of that. I mean the words were used interchangeably until more recent years when people decided to call them different things. But so I use them interchangeably.
So if people um born that way and parents start noticing, this is what I'm assuming. Parents love their kids, so they think that they can help them without getting professional help, or maybe get professional help but not that good because they want somebody that they can trust versus somebody that's good. Can a psychopath be stopped if they're born that way? Can they be fixed, and what age?
I don't like to say no, that it's impossible because I like to believe that everybody can be fixed. But you have to start super early. You
Like,
have
how
to,
early?
well, like when they're born, you have to bring them in. I mean that's the thing. They're born into a home that's very cruel and very violent and all of that. And so so those kinds of parents aren't going to bring them to a psychiatrist
Yeah.
and say, we noticed that he seems to be, I don't know. He seems to be well, we noticed that I mean it would be great, and I'm not saying that there aren't some parents who do this, but like if I mean they obviously if a parent saw their child at any age being cruel to animals, like whether it's an ant, or a chicken or a dog, it could be any kind of animal actually. If a parent sees their child doing that, they need to bring them to a mental health
You
professional.
also said if they wet the bed or if they light fires and stuff like that,
Yes,
right?
right, right.
Yeah. So that would be cool if I wet the bed now and like, I'm a serial killer. I can be I gotta be so cool. But one of the twists that I have, like, what did you watch Dexter?
No, I never watched Dexter.
Yeah, so it's pretty good. So it's a story of this kid that his mother was murdered in front of him by a Colombian drug cartel, and the cop that found him, took him as a son, but he knew that he would never recover, and he saw all the signs that you're
Mhm.
saying. So he decided he's going to teach him how to only kill bad people, criminals, because he's not to be able to fix. So I always wanted to know if that plot is right, like could he be fixed at some point? And I think in season 5 or something, there was a psychiatrist that was actually helped raise him that way, because she said you can never be fixed if you were that. But again, that's TV. That's why I wanted to ask you. Um, if
No,
that's
that
something.
isn't a good solution. No, have him only kill bad people because I don't think that the police or the courts would make a
Oh
distinction.
yeah, no, of course. I mean, it's bad. It's just like the plot twist of him not
Uh,
being able to be fixed, so send him a certain way. What about if we talk more? I do you work more with children or adults or both?
both.
Okay. If we
But
talk about
wait, but let's go back to Dexter for a minute.
yep,
So if his thing, like if the idea was that his seeing his mother murdered violently, presumably by this cartel person, um, and that was a trauma in the way that kind of made him want to kill. I mean, he must have been pretty young, like what, 3 years old or something?
I think he was 4 or something, yeah.
Yeah. Um, that he still could have been, I mean, that was a trauma, but he still could have been fixed, really,
Mm.
if he got intensive therapy.
Yeah. Well, that in okay, I'll allow it spoiler if you haven't watched Dexter from 20 years ago, we can
Yeah.
pause now. But he in the plot he tried to save him, but then he saw exactly what you're saying. He was killing animals, he was doing stuff. And in the plot, there's also a bigger brother, which is surprised in season later that was not be able to fix. The cop didn't even take him because he's too old. He's 7 or 8. But he starts seeing Dexter doing killing animals, enjoying blood, really wanna, so that's when he started, okay, he did take him to a therapist, but that's when they did the code. It was like of how to kill bad people. Um, but another thing is like I think we need to talk about is like in that level, killing for regular people. Like let's forget about criminals and terrorists and stuff. A regular person when they do something like an accident or somebody heroic like a cop or a soldier, that does that. Like how do you recover from this? Do you deal with that trauma as well? And I think boys have a question, so I'm gonna shut up after this.
Okay. Well, we have, that some people come home from war with PTSD. And yes, even cops who have to kill in their line of work. I mean, it is traumatic and they have to somehow, it does affect them. It affects some people more than others, and it doesn't, I mean, we have seen that the real key though is treatment. Even if like even the 7 or 8 year old or 9 year old that kid in Dexter, he could have been treated. These people could have been treated, and certainly people from war. The problem with people, military coming home from war, is that the military doesn't provide enough psychiatric
Yeah.
treatment to them, and that's why a lot of them turn towards drugs to forget about what they saw, and then they get into all kinds of other problems. So
And
I
also
can't.
with nurses during COVID and doctors, seeing
Yes.
so many people. Yeah. I remember I was in the hospital for a long time during COVID, and there was a lot of people you always hear of people, emergency here, like almost every 5 seconds somebody was dying. And then they realized that the patients there are listening to this in the mics, in the
Mm.
hospital. So they decided they're gonna play Here Comes the Sun every time somebody cured, because we know when somebody, and I think that was brilliant because we all were like just laying in bed and waiting to die or whatever. And you're like, and you heard, Here comes this, and it's like, oh yeah, and everybody's cheering. And I think that little thing, and I'm sure
Where was
psychiatrists
that?
did that, huh?
Where was that? What hospital was that in?
That was Long Island, Northwell, Manhattan. It
Uh-huh.
was it was pretty
That,
good.
that
Yeah.
was a good thing.
Yeah,
I
and
I
a
traded
psychiatrist came up with that.
uh that was good.
And the
Of
other
course,
thing is like during they were wearing all masks, obviously, and people and children that was born and people never saw, so they will have a picture of themselves smiling here. It's like this is me, and that
uh,
made also a big difference.
yes, yes, that was very good.
Yep.
I trained at NYU Bellevue, since we're talking New York, which
Oh, okay.
most
Nice.
most amazing, place to train in psychiatry because it really
I
had
gotta
the
tell
most
you, my
variety.
yeah, psychiatry is a major. I've been through a lot during that time, and I think my whole team was I had a heart transplant, you know, and I
Oh,
had COVID and I had everything at that time. But it was like most time there was no hope, but I think my whole team, entire team was amazing, but specifically also my psychiatrist, the way we talk. And I remember one time she was asking me like, "What are you afraid of?" Like, let's write down what are you afraid of. Are you afraid to die? I was like, not really. I'm afraid of living and not living. I was in coma and a long time. See, stuff like, but they can really break if you have a good psychiatrist, I think it's a key to a lot of things. Which leads
yes.
me to one last question for before I know Boris, you want to say something, but what do you think is also
Boris is going to need a psychiatrist if he
I
ever.
know. But it's so excited to have you here. It's like, what about the overdoing it? I feel like a lot of people overdoing it. Some people have three psychiatrists and like, is that also a thing?
Well, I'll tell you the problem with that. I mean, the
Yeah.
problem with psychiatry today. Um, the problem is that a lot over the last 10 years at least, probably more, psychiatrists have become pill pushers. They don't do therapy. Now, when I trained in psychiatry, I trained in, yes, we need to know the different medications, and I trained on all different kinds of patients, children, adolescents, adults with all different kinds of problems. And so, yes, for some kinds of problems, especially if they're in the hospital at Bellevue, you generally need to use medication. But but also therapy. Like what I would do was I had group therapy and individual therapy for all the patients that were assigned to me. I would have group therapy for all those on a particular ward that was assigned to me, and I also saw them individually. With therapy, with Freudian, psychoanalytically oriented psychotherapy. And I was trained that in order to treat somebody, you need to do both. Well, you need to do therapy. That's at the root of the treatment. And then if they also need medication, you can give them medication. Unfortunately, what happened since then is that insurance companies decided that it costs too much money or it costs, well, too much and more money to have psychiatrists do therapy, because psychiatrists are MDs, and so they charge more for their treatments. And so if a psychiatrist does therapy, that hour would be cost more than if a social worker, or a marriage and family therapist, or even a psychologist did therapy. So what the insurance company did was to say that they are only going to pay, they're not going to pay as much, they're not going to pay enough basically for psychiatrists to do therapy. Because if you do therapy, which is like 45 minutes to an hour, in one day you can only see 8 patients. So if the insurance companies lowered the amount that they paid for therapy, and you can only see 8 patients a day in your full 8-hour day, then that made it impossible for psychiatrists to continue. Well, I won't, I'll explain, not totally impossible, but for most psychiatrists, it made it impossible for them to continue to do therapy. So what they did instead was to become pill pushers, and they have med visits. They see patients, like a patient comes in, they see the patient, they ask them about their symptoms, and they give them a prescription. The first visit, maybe they'll spend a half an hour with them, and then they give them a prescription. And then the and then after that, when the patient comes back, they'll see them every month or every 3 months, and they just keep the patients. They ask them, "Do you have side effects? Do you have what symptoms do you have?" And they just give them more medicine because the patient isn't better. And so that's what we have now. We have a lot of people are on a lot of different medications because they're seeing psychiatrists who are just giving them the medications and not giving them therapy. And most of them aren't going to any other kind of therapist to get the therapy. And even if they do, they don't generally meet with the psychiatrist to put the treatment plan together. So that's why, the psychiatry today is horrible. Now, what I do is I won't see anybody unless they see me for therapy at least once a week. And if they need medicine, I also give them medicine. But this idea of just pills is really literally killing people, because as a forensic psychiatrist, an expert witness, I've done cases where people have died, have killed themselves, or they have killed other people because they stopped taking, they're on this whole cocktail of medications and it drives them crazy.
Um, okay,
Of course.
that was a lot. That preceded one of my questions actually, because I was going to ask about, first of all, the difference between you have your psychiatrists that prescribe, and then obviously you have psychologists and social workers that don't prescribe, but they also have less medical training. And then there's also, again, this is sort of like a layman's view of it, but there's also a little bit of stereotype about like psychiatrists are kind of a profession. They're drawn to it because they have their own issues. Is that fair to say? Is that it's very common for a psychiatrist to have a psychiatrist, right?
Well, not just psychiatrists, though, anybody who goes into the mental health field, that is sometimes the motivation.
It's almost like a reverse bald barber or skinny. It's more a fat chef than a bald barber because he has some experience with it. But the actual question I wanted to get to,
Yes. I'm
and
just
I don't
looking
know
at
if
my phone because I know at in 9 minutes I have in 9 minutes I have another interview. So I was just trying to see if they were trying to
Yeah,
call
no,
you.
we'll end
got
there. We
it.
have 4 more minutes. Yeah.
So I'll make this quick. Basically, it seems like it's not necessarily anybody doing anything wrong, but sort of a natural phenomenon of the fact that to be a good psychiatrist, you need a lot of training, you need a lot of medical school, and your time is very expensive. And so it's only natural that you would either have to channel a high demand for therapists to people whose time is less expensive, or you would have these negative consequences where people end up pushing pills because they feel that their time is valuable. And obviously, there's some moral calculations there as well. But aside from that, do you think that there's a role for AI in this, or is it kind of a dangerous quagmire to have people getting therapy from sort of what's already being seen as maybe a dangerous feedback loop? Or can it be trained in a way where there's an intermediary where maybe you see a therapist once a month, but you have your AI for regular chats in the meantime?
AI, bad, bad, vampire, bad. Um, no, AI is bad for anything. You could possibly use it for like secretarial kinds of things, like filling out reports, or I don't even know. But in terms of patients, AI is the exact opposite of what patients need, because the thing that helps patients in any kind of therapy is the relationship between the patient and the therapist.
Yeah, the
And if you
human
have,
connection too.
and what?
The human connection.
Yes. And so I mean, yes, some people actually do develop relationships with their chatbots or whatever, but that's very, very sick. They need a psychiatrist to fix them from that.
But just to play devil's advocate a little bit, and to be clear, I probably agree with you more than I don't. But just out of curiosity, if you got it to the point where it was in what's the word for it? The test in a Turing test sense, indistinguishable to the patient, whether they were talking to an AI or whether they were talking to a therapist. And if the AI, again, in some future iteration, is sophisticated enough that it can listen to what the patient is saying, figure out patterns in that speech that might signify problems better than the average social worker with 3 years of schooling and maybe their own mental issues. Is there any
But
room
wait,
for that?
but the therapist also, besides what they learn in school, they're also reacting with their gut and their heart. They also sense things from the patient sitting across from them. So an AI bot or whatever couldn't do that. Plus, they have found actually in some of the things that they tested that some of these AI I'll just call them bots, are actually telling kids in particular, telling them, or people too, telling them the wrong thing. Like, what was the thing? Suggesting to them that they kill themselves. I mean, there's no control over the bots once you program them,
Yeah.
and they kind of run amok.
And also there's no, they can't see the tone of voice, your skin, the way you're reacting,
Right.
but isn't even talking to AI is talking to yourself, which is the definition of being crazy. Because an AI will take your tone of voice, what you want to hear, and do it back to you. Anyway, Dr. Lieberman, it was great to have you. Always would love to have you again. If you people want to follow you, I know you're big in on X, or want to buy your book or go to your website, where can they find you and do all that?
Okay, well, on X, I'm Dr. Carole MD, which is DrCarole MD. I do rant on X. And my favorite website is terrorist. My favorite website of mine is terroristtherapist.com. And you can see these videos. I really would love you to watch these videos. And you can buy my book, Lions and Tigers and Terrorists. You could also buy my book on Amazon. But
And your
anyway, so
podcast?
and my podcast, Terrorist Therapist Show, you can hear it on my website, terroristtherapist.com, but you can wherever podcasts are, you can find it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much,
This
Boris.
was fun,
People want to
yes.
follow you. And if you're ever in New York, come watch a comedy show. Boris, what do you have going on?
At the Boris K on Twitter and Instagram and all the socials, people can find all my stuff.
All right. And this is live from America. Carole, thank you so much. Great to have you.
Very welcome. Thank you.